are you, Lane?
For a while, I've been wanting to make some shorter discussions, but I always end up turning I'll talk about one scene into, oh god, it's 3 AM, I'm at 10 pages, oh no, please someone send help. But I think I've finally found something that fits the bill, and that's some of the character design work in Serial Experiments Lain, and we're going to be talking about one particular design that Lain goes through today. But before we get into that, let me tell you two pieces of useful information. I want to make two things clear. I have yet to finalize my thoughts and understanding of the anime because, well, it's probably clear why if you've seen it, and secondly, I've rarely talked about character designs before, so I'm no expert in this category, so take it all with a grain of salt, I guess. But with those out of the way, let's get at it. This is the design I wanted to talk about here today. When it first shows up in the anime in episode 10, I immediately thought to myself, this is iconic. And I guess that means this video is really just an experiment in figuring out why I thought that. I think the first reason is it's very much a distinct marker for the end of the anime. Characters obviously change outfits throughout the series, but when it's directly shown to us, there's a much more present feeling of change, rather than just a scene change. But naturally, they couldn't have had Lain just change shirts and get the same result. If you asked anyone to describe what she looks like here in one word, it would probably be mess. And there's always subjectivity to visuals, but I don't think there's much dispute that mess is the intended feeling here. For the longest time, we've watched Lain's room devolve. At first, it's nearly barren, housing just her bed and her old navy. She slowly gathers more and more tech until it's spilling out of the house, forming a literal tumor of technology. Yet despite all of this, Lain herself was usually saved from that mess. For all the change that she is forcing around her and even within herself, there was a hint that she wasn't fully absorbed, and that's that she wasn't collected into this mess yet. But then there's a major shift after she breaks down the barrier. Not her going from one side to another, but what just seems to be insanity. She changes her mind on needing a body, she resets the memories of the world to only be positive about her, and accidentally mentally destroys Alice, and that's only mentioning a few things. There was always some care left in Lain's character, even when it was obvious that she was different and hardly holding on, but she feels just mostly cold and crazy here, so a design which makes her more messy and more like cold technology is an excellent physical pairing, and making it an extension of her last outfit is simply quite perfect. Because she seems so close to the edge, making it an adaptation rather than something entirely new is once again a great parallel. That outfit didn't even seem to fit her character very much, but then as the series progressed, she grew more and more into it, and now we see how it's taken her over. The last little bit of Lain's been lost. She looks the same, but really isn't the same anymore. So make her look the same, but be clearly distinct. To me, that's just good design. I think there could also be some idea of purity going along with the insanity. The jumbled mess is made of wires, but that's not what we're getting to right here. We'll get back to that shortly. What matters is the color of those wires. And now, just by default, wires are most often black, so this point is probably more of a stretch than most, but they also add that color of black, which is usually resolved for darkness or similar concepts, to a formerly wholly white outfit, which is most often associated with purity. Despite seeming like a stretch, I bring this up because it's always struck me as odd how adult all the literal children in the anime were, and how Lain went from being quite outside of that, naive and unaware, to the most involved with their corrupting factors, technology, and spaces which connected them instantly to an overly adult world. So there may be something here about a fall from purity, if you will, as well. The choice of wires is also much more than simply because they're a piece of technology that's easiest to wear or throw onto a character. Wires are the method of connection for technology, and Serial Experiments Lain is an anime all about connection. Lain's decision as she's attaching these wires is to make connections by breaking down the barrier between humanity and the collective unconscious, utilizing the wires. Now, I'll explain the concept of the collective unconscious later because it's a very odd concept and appears in a few other anime, namely NGE and Code Geass, where we actually have lightly covered it before, but we'll get into the concept as a whole and those other anime much more in a separate and dedicated video. So what you need to know here is simply that it's a method for communication, essentially giving all humans the same consciousness. Often it's rejected at the end of a story for being a sort of false connection. Taking that into account, along with all the false friends and family Lain has, and the anonymous and thus somewhat false connections she has outside of them, it's exceptionally fitting that all of these wires, a method of communication, are pointless. There's alligator clips on her hair, she wraps some of the cords around her quite intentionally, but others seem to just be thrown on, and ironically, up until now, the wire has seemed to require minimal physical connection, if anything. In fact, one of the most distinct things about the anime is how minimally they show the need for devices to connect to the wired. The line between both worlds is exceptionally minimal, and we even see Lain connect to it with her voice alone earlier.
Connect to the wired.
These wires don't actually connect to anything, but Lain has gotten so obsessed with the idea of connection that she uses them for show anyway, and just for herself at that. Now, my favorite one of these clips is the one directly on her lips. It's like because the most typical method of communication, speech, which comes from the mouth, hasn't worked, she placed a connection there thinking that would somehow change something. Now, this is once again a stretch. That one's probably just because it also made the wires more dynamic and it just looks super memorable, but I like to think that there was also some deeper level to it like that.
Who will it be today?
Let's all love Lain. Let's all love Lain. Let's all love Lain.
Just remember, it's easy to die, Lain.
But getting back to something a bit more reasonable, when these false connections, these wires, are seen later by Alice, they just fall off of Lain anyway because they weren't actually doing anything, as we've said. And that's a point we have to mention as well. The fact that as Lain actually connects with someone for the first time in forever, immediately afterwards she effortlessly casts off these markers of false connection. She doesn't even seem to notice them. They were just the literal making of and then casting off of false connections, and it's one of the best notes of this design. Now, for wires making connections, you also have to admit that they're annoying as hell. They're a jumbled mess, they're always in awkward spaces, they look so untidy, and they physically hold things back. They have a limited distance, and often a connection can't be made because of their physical limitations. This is something else I like to think was done intentionally with this design. It's no secret that as the anime progressed, Lain becomes a bit too absorbed in technology. From her father's lack of trust,
I think that my little girl perhaps has become obsessed with the wired.
to Alice's direct call-out,
Lately, it seems you've been slipping away again.
this is plain as day to see. The more she focuses on technology, the more she drives away actual genuine connection, confronting others and staying alone in her room, no more so than at the end. I love that because technology is holding her back, she equips herself with the most physically limiting factor of technology to, in heavy quotes, make connections. It's like now she couldn't even reach others if she wanted to. And this might even pull a bit of double duty. Because she decides at the end that she has no need for a body, at least for a moment, it's reasonable that she would limit her physical form in such a way, even if it's just for personal show. Something like, I couldn't even use my body if I wanted to, so I have to keep going down this path everyone who loved me told me was wrong. Looking at it as sloppy would also fit with a newfound lack of care for the body. All it is now, her body is a tool, so it gets outfitted with the same things any other technological tool would. I also have one last possibility I wanted to bring up, but this one is definitely the biggest stretch of them all, and even to myself I want to stress possibility. This is more like I think it's kind of cool than I think it's intentional. The false god of serial Experiments Lain, Masami Iri, has a very distinct design with the wrappings, flowing coat, and the red markings on his face. He's very showy about being God, altering his appearance and floating around. Then we see that Lain is actually God and not him, where she's very much the opposite. The show of these wires was only for herself. It seems pretty clear that she wasn't expecting to really see anyone. Where Masami tries to elevate himself in design, Lain has no care for it. I think this lack of care fits with the fact that she doesn't really want to be God. As her more confident self says to, well, herself,
It would be much easier if you became God. I think it would be a lot easier than being a human being.
but this isn't something Lain wants. So it's possible that this is also a sloppy version of Masami's design. They each have most prominently a white article of clothing. They're each wrapped up in some way, one with physical wrappings and the other with wires, and Lain almost has similar facial markings. The two pad connections on her face are similarly placed, and the alligator clips also give her sections of red running down her face in a similar way. Again, it's very much a stretch, but it would be somewhat fitting with their wishes that they're each takes on the design of God. One who's shaped himself around appearances and mindless belief, and one who's actually doing the work of a god so they don't focus on physical appearance. I doubt this is intentional, but I'll give serial Experiments Lain the benefit of the doubt for now and assume that all its surrealism has a point, since I'm still undecided on it overall. And at the end of the day, a design means nothing if it isn't appealing or fitting in some way. It doesn't mean it has to look good or be attractive, as some designs are perfectly horrific or ugly or creepy and so on, but it needs to feel fitting for the situation, catch your eye, and just sit right with the viewer. And for an anime that puts its weirdest aspects front and center, this was about perfect. I don't know if it was the same for everyone, but I did legitimately think wow when I saw this design. And I think I was able to validate that thought a little bit here today and hopefully convince some of you as well. But again, I'm no expert in this at all, so if I missed anything or just got it flat out wrong, let me know down below so I can improve in the future, because this was nice to do a somewhat shorter video and go into technical aspects again. For returning viewers, I'm sorry this is the only video this week, as it is, at least for our standards, pretty short, but the time saved here is going into making a proper video on Lain, and well, let's just say I wanted to make it match some of the insanity of a quite insane anime, so keep an eye out for that hopefully next week, and maybe with some of these shorter videos we'll be able to get back to 2 a week, but knowing how much I go overboard, we'll have to see there. If you want to help me get to that point, you can support me on Patreon. Hey, we transitioned well once, so there will be a link in the pinned comment to that. We can get your name at the end of videos like these lovely people here, and if we get enough, we'll get some extra perks for you guys as well. There'll also be links to my Twitter and Discord, but I've already rambled long enough, so I'll just say thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon.